but the wisest cabbie in Christendom is a man called Fred, and he's a regular caller to this show.
Okay.
And he wants to put one or two things to you, if you wouldn't mind. Go ahead, Fred. Fred, are you there? Go ahead. Ask Tom anything you like.
Right, the first question I've got to put to you is they were not steel frame buildings.
Pardon me?
Neither of the Twin Towers are steel frame buildings. They were built around the central core, but they're basically curtain buildings, which is completely different from a steel frame building. Now, I don't
well, they were built with steel, and there was an exoskeleton and an interior set of 42
They are not steel framed. A steel frame building is something like the Empire State Building, and if one of those jets had crashed into that, it would have stood up. They were not steel framed, and they were never built to withstand a jumbo jet or any other jet with 50 tons of aviation fuel hitting them at something like 300 to 400 miles an hour. I don't know if you have any idea of the sort of energy that's released at that level. But let me ask you this. Are you one of these that believes that there are explosives placed in there?
Well, I respect that you're a cabbie, and I've been a cabbie in New York City myself, and I think it's a great occupation, and I get to meet a lot of people, and I get to talk with a lot of people. But there's a group in this country called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, okay? And they are very upset that their profession is being made to look like a bunch of fools, like they don't know what they're doing. And there's over 600 of them now. There's almost 700 that are saying that buildings that have stood that long can't just collapse, especially from a fire, as Building 7 is, we're told, collapsed from. Now, you will acknowledge that Building 7 is a steel frame building?
I don't know about Building 7. I can tell you that the Twin Towers are not steel frame buildings. Are you aware of what temperature high tensile steel melts at?
I think that it begins to get damaged, maybe it warps at around 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit.
Actually, it starts to weaken at 500 degrees and it melts at 1,500 degrees. The temperature inside those buildings was far in excess of what they were designed to withstand. But let me ask you this.
Well, wait a second. Let me respond to what you just said, okay? As I understand it, to achieve temperatures like that, you need a blast furnace. These were carbon-based fires, right? Steel wicks heat away from the source, so that it has to be very hot. But in any case, even if it did weaken some of the steel, how does the building then fall down at basically free fall speed? How does this happen?
Well, for the very same reason,
the cold steel beneath has been holding this building up, the top of this building up, for decades. Why all of a sudden, because there's some melted or fire damage at the very top, 80 floors suddenly disappear?
I'll explain that to you. They didn't just literally disappear. It's called a compound fracture, and it's a compound load. When the upper 4 or 5 stories start to collapse, the weight increases on each floor as it goes down. And if you look at it like a pack of cards, it's exactly what happened. Of course, the 700 architects that are arguing against it have also designed buildings of a similar structure. And they let me respond, please, then, to what you just said.
Well, before you do, Tom, both of you are going to have to hold your fire for a moment so I can take some capitalist messages. Well, let's go back to the fight in Madison Square Gardens between Fred, the wisest cabbie in Christendom, and Tom Kiley, the radio newsman from New York City. Now, Tom, you had the microphone. It's your response.
Yes, I was responding.
Yes.
Even if you think that because the top broke, the top 10 floors or the top 20 floors or what have you broke, and then fell down straight through all that cold steel that had been holding those same floors up for decades, okay? If that's what you're telling me, that that's what happened, then logic tells me that those thousands of bolts on each floor must be sheared, okay? And that takes energy, and that slows down the collapse, all right? Well, actually, these buildings came down as if there was nothing there at all, the same way that demolished buildings come down when the resistance of all of those columns and bolts have been removed so that the building can come straight down within itself. I don't understand where the energy went if it just came down at free fall speed. And that's just for the 2 buildings, by the way, that were struck by the jets. Building 7 comes down from what we're told is an office fire.
Fred, last word to you.
The amount of energy released by 50 tons of kerosene coming to a dead stop in an aircraft weighing 150 tons is by far in excess of what that building was designed. But just answer me this one question. Well, two questions I've got for you. One, if there was explosive planted within that building, why didn't they send those explosive off when the aircraft hit? Why did they wait 30 minutes before detonating it?
Well, I can give you that's a theory,
well,
and
no,
I'm
let me
happy
finish,
to
because
theorize.
that allows video evidence of the explosions. It would have made sense, right, to set those explosions off immediately on the impact of the aircraft. The second question
I disagree with that.
Well, go
ahead.
Hear the second one first.
Sure.
Go on, Fred.
The second question I've got for you is if they were able to arrange this type of terrorist act, then why didn't they place WMDs in Iraq? That'd have been a lot easier, wouldn't it? They didn't do it, did they?
Well, of course, this happened before the war in Iraq.
Yes, it did, but when we went to war in Iraq on weapons of mass destruction, how easy would it have been for the American and British government to have placed those weapons there and said, there we are, we told you so, look, here they are.
Okay, I mean, that's a fair enough point, but it's a subsequent point. So let's Tom answer that now.
It's a lot of theorizing, and I'm happy to go to the theorizing, but before I do, let's stay within the realm of fact. I have seen the designers of the World Trade Center on film explaining that these buildings were designed because of the famous aircraft that struck the Empire State Building, that they designed these buildings to withstand multiple Boeing 707 strikes. Multiple Boeing 707. Now, Fred, maybe you haven't seen that. I urge that you do. Go to YouTube. You can see the gentleman saying it himself. Okay. Now, so I disagree when you say that they were not designed to handle this.
Well,
okay, they're very tall buildings, and there's a lot of airplanes around, and it would be very silly not to do that. Now you're asking me to theorize if these buildings were wired to explode, why wouldn't they do it right away? Well, now I'm happy to take off my factual hat and put on my theorizing hat because you've asked me to do that, and I'm happy to do that. But I want everyone to understand that I'm being asked to forget about the what and to go into the whys and the whos, okay? So let's do that right now. I'm going to theorize with you. First of all, I submit to you that it doesn't take very much thought to come up with the idea that the attacks on September the 11th were psychological operations. Do you agree that whoever it was, the plotters were, who designed this, it was designed to create a lot of psychological damage to people? Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, without a doubt, yeah. I go along with that.
Okay, very good. So we agree. Okay, so then, if those buildings came down immediately, right, as soon as the jet hit, right, maybe nobody or hardly anyone would have even seen it.
Your point is that the aircraft striking it drew the world's attention to it, and then the very dramatic collapse of the buildings, yeah?
Once everybody was staring at it, once the world's media was focused on it, then I theorize, then the buildings can come down. And also, the planes were, if they were wired, if these buildings were wired to come down, the planes would be necessary to give people like our friend the cab driver reasonable doubt as to whether or not these buildings had been wired.
Yeah,
Obviously, if somebody pushed a button, they blew up, and we can't be talking just about hijackers.
Yeah, I want to press on, and you're going to have to come back tomorrow night. You understand that, because you've set the switchboard alight. So I'm going to say thanks to Fred.